Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Minot Talk today. It's 9 a.m. We're back. We're joined by Alderman Mike Blessum. Thanks for coming on today.
Yep. Good to see you.
Yes, you guys had a good city council meeting yesterday, and you had an ALPR committee a couple weeks ago. So we get a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's going to be good.
Yep.
But there's a ton of stuff that's been happening. One, NDSU Bison, they're back in the tournament as a 14 seed, so that's kind of cool. They're going to play Michigan State on Thursday. So North Dakota can at least pay attention to the... Do you follow March Madness much?
Well, interestingly, this year's a little different. I'm not typically a big basketball fan.
Yeah.
You'll mention the girls,
Right.
Minot High girls here in a minute, but Lily Bell's a member of our family. So she's my wife's cousin's daughter,
Right.
and we follow her very closely. And she's going to Oklahoma. The Oklahoma women are a 4 seed in the women's tournament.
Gotcha.
So we'll be watching that closely. They play Friday night. And they do it interesting because those are home sites. So Oklahoma's hosting those this coming weekend. So it's going to be cool. It's fun to start watching her teammates that she's going to have down there and get to know it a little bit.
Yeah, she was phenomenal in the Minot High girls when they won state championship. That was the first time in a few years. So that was pretty exciting for sure.
For her and Maggie Fricky, both they won it as 8th graders, which was kind of came out of nowhere a little bit, but at the same time, just fabulous team. And then, man, just adversity over the last 3 years, and then to do it on the last one was pretty darn cool.
Get a book in, I guess the right word is book in their careers. They get at the beginning, at the end. Of course, 8th graders in high school basketball is crazy too.
Well, not only that, but you look at what the two of them did.
Yeah.
Maggie just missed getting to 2,000. We were pulling for her to get there. Points over her career, just missed it. Obviously, without the injuries, she's easily there and maybe close to 3,000. But the two of them having two Division I athletes on the same team for 5 years is just incredible. And I hope people got to see them, and I hope that they appreciated what we all got to see for that time. Because it's extremely rare. It's especially, Minot's a basketball school, especially on the boys' side. Girls has maybe not been that, but right now it certainly is. And we really enjoyed it. Over the last couple of years, I've missed just a couple games just because we're traveling and watching Lily play, and just so proud of the girls. They did a great job.
That's fantastic. Very cool. Another thing that's interesting is USA Para Hockey, they won gold. So that means that the U.S. Hockey took a clean sweep in ladies, men's, and para. So that's pretty exciting too. Well, and there's a Minot connection there, right?
Yeah, there is. And there definitely is that. The goalie coach is from Minot. And I didn't know him. I think my wife knows his wife maybe. But the other thing I was going to say was I saw something online that said, since Canada booed the U.S. anthem, what is it, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Yep. They've gone something like 0-4 against us in hockey and in winning gold. So, maybe don't go that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny. Another interesting news item. We're just rocking through these. This hits closer to home. There was a bomb threat at the state capitol late Sunday night. So that's never comfortable. But there was no bomb that was found. Police showed up. It was around 9:52 that the Bismarck Central Dispatch received a call stating the bomb had been placed inside the building. But members of the Bismarck Bomb Squad, alongside State Patrol, police, and fire units, responded to the Capitol, searched the building, and found no bomb. So that's interesting. A drone was deployed, though. They had it all working out there as they should have to make sure that things were safe and secure at the state capitol. It's a bummer that stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
For sure. And then one last bit of local news. We'll move on to city council, which is also local news. But one last bit is the Dakota Square Mall has a new general manager, Robin Hofer, recently joined Dakota Square's Mall's management team. He's originally grew up on a dairy farm near Turtle Lake, earned his bachelor's degree from Minnesota State University Moorhead, and then experience in retail management with 35 years across Marshall, Fields, JCPenney, Dillard's, and Dayton's. So interesting stuff. Maybe some changes coming to Dakota Square Mall, or maybe not. See how that goes. So, all right, we have you here today, and I'm excited. We schedule these, and we schedule them by faith. that something interesting is going to happen at city council. Sometimes it's just a real brief run through, and that's what it is. But
it feels like it's been rare that it's been brief or boring.
You are right.
It seems like it's been a pretty easy bet to have one of us on after the meeting because there's something to talk about. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And so this time we have ALPR, which was a committee there's an ALPR, basically oversight committee that's been formed. And so that's something that you're a part of that we get to talk about. Then there was a special budget meeting that was had before city council meeting. A lot of interesting things that were talked about there that we'll be able to run through. And then the actual city council meeting itself, where topics such as ALPR came back up, liquor license came up, and some effectively budget moves came up in there that we'll talk about that are millions of dollars, so they are fairly substantial to our city. So let's kick it off with the discussion on the ALPR. Basically, if you would, because I failed as a journalist and I wasn't able to be at that committee, the ALPR committee that was held a couple weeks ago, we have some information about what went on at that, talking about what the facial or what the software does, how it's not facial recognition software, how there's no real-time tracking or biometric surveillance, but kind of talk about what that committee does and kind of what you hope to see come from that committee.
Sure. So unfortunately, it wasn't broadcast, and I'm going to try to make sure that the rest of them are. We need to have that information on the public. It's one of the main reasons that we have the oversight committee. So a few things happened in that meeting. One is that we got a timeline from the police department. Deputy Chief Plessis talked us through a little bit what they need to do. Captain Sunheim went through some of the pieces in the system for us, helped us understand, kind of how the system looks, how it works, what they're going to be using, how they'll use it, things like that. And then they talked about just timeline, because they have to work through policy and make sure that that's finalized with what the council directed. Although there's a kind of an interesting nuance there that type of policy doesn't actually live in ordinance, and it doesn't live in anything that the council actually oversees directly. So theoretically, management in the police department can adjust those policies as they see fit. Now, to the credit of the leadership team there, and I credit Dale Plessis a lot for this, they've engaged the council because Dale has told us from the very beginning there are questions about this that need to be answered, and we need to make sure that we're on the right side of it. And so, kudos to them. They're doing things the right way. But they've got some work to do. And so, right now, if I had to guess, we would probably see it turned on late April, early May, somewhere in there. Once they're able to get everything kind of finalized, get the system up and going the way that they want, and then most importantly, do the training for the officers, because that's the big thing. The officers need to know how to use it responsibly, use it within the policy, so that they're doing it the right way. And so that was a big part of the meeting. There was also really important discussions in my mind around data access and Freedom of Information Act requests, which is something that we had tasked our city attorney to look into, working with the Attorney General's office and BCI. I'm not disappointed in the work that was done. They did their work and they did it right. I'm disappointed in the answers that we're getting so far, because the answers seem to say two things that don't make sense to me at the same time. The first thing is that if as an example, if you wanted to, Jonathan, you couldn't call up and just say, hey, I'd like, or make a request saying, I'd like this kind of data for people that drove down, by your office, right? You can't request that because the BCI has determined, and there aren't court cases to overturn this yet. BCI has determined that this is investigative data. Okay. And so because it's investigative data, it's not available to the public. It's part of a protected set of information under state law. That means it's not available for those types of requests. But at the same time, for those that have followed this, one of the things that has been said throughout is there's no difference in this data than if you stood on the corner and wrote down license plates. Right. So it's this idea that it's completely innocuous data. It's freely available. When you drive on the roads, anybody can see your license plate. It's required by law that you display it. And, in fact, we had a discussion last night from Josiah Rice talking about even the lights on the back of a vehicle that are meant to be there under the law. So those two things can't exist at the same time in my mind. It can't be completely innocuous data that anybody could write down and be investigative data protected by privacy law,
Yeah.
right? So I don't, and I voiced that multiple times during the meeting. And again, I chair the committee, so I'm able to kind of push things where I want it to go. And I don't know that we have a good answer for that yet.
Right.
And I don't know, I guess maybe that I'm getting across the issue that I'm seeing there, but to me it's very clear.
Yeah.
And then the maybe the bigger issue from an oversight perspective is that as a committee, we actually can't see the data.
Gotcha.
So I had envisioned as a committee, at the very least, we would see a redacted list of searches. Now, it's not, oh, here's the license plate or here's the name we were looking for, any of that stuff. But it would be, here's the individual searches, here's what was searched and why it was searched and what they were looking for. As an example, I would think at some point there'll be a search where, oh, there was a hit and run overnight.
Right.
And we'd like to see, we know it was a black vehicle. We have a ring camera from down the street that sees a blur of a pickup go by.
Yeah.
And now we want to see, okay, based on our ALPR technology, the mounted cameras in officers' cars, what black pickups were within that vicinity during that hour period, right? Again, I've never doubted this being an efficient way to solve crime. That's not the question. The question is does it break the Fourth Amendment?
Right.
But so I would see a search like that, right? And I would like to see in that list that, okay, here's the search we did, here's what we were looking for. And I think maybe most important, and we talked about this in the meeting, what was the actual result? Did we actually solve the crime because we did this? Because one of the things that I tried to get across to the chief was, if we're doing this, if you think of the COVID era, right? I remember the governor standing up and saying, hey, we're going to go along with this. We need 2 weeks to kind of slow the spread here. We're going to ask these types of businesses to close their doors, right? Like we're going to literally say, you don't get to make money to put food on your table because we need to slow the spread of this.
Right.
If we're going to make those kind of draconian statements and laws and proclamations, we need to have results that show, wow, that trade-off was worth it. Because it is a trade-off, right? The trade-off was, we're going to cause big hardship for these businesses at that time. But the trade-off should have been, we slow the spread and it's over and we're back to normal fast, right? Well, we all know that that's not what happened. Even in North Dakota, where we tend to think of ourselves as sort of, hey, we're generally liberty focused, right? Not that we're all crazy libertarians, but generally there versus the rest of the country, we still had all of our orders in place from March all the way to January. And we were one of the better states nationwide because I've done work around tax law with this stuff. So
it's crazy.
When you do that trade-off, when you make the trade-off in ALPR to say, okay, the investigative data is worth it to have in that database, and I'm willing to make that trade-off, boy, we better see major gains, right? We better solve a lot of crime. We better really, really clean up everything that might be going on around the city. And so that's the thing that I'm trying to get across. So I'm hoping that we could get those searches. Well, what they told us is, nope, the committee can't have it. I asked, okay, they said only employees of the city have access to that data in certain spots. And I said, okay, I get a W-2 from the city. I'm an employee. So can you get me the data as the chair of the oversight committee? Well, we'll have to look into that, because an elected official, even though you're technically an employee in terms of tax law, that's not the same thing that they're looking for in the law here. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I can
why
tell.
Will they not give it? Why?
Because they believe that the law doesn't allow them to.
Gotcha.
Because it's investigative data. It's back to that same idea, right?
Okay.
So I can't just have access to every piece of evidence that the police department has as they're building a case on something. It doesn't work that way. At the same time, though, if we're going to have this kind of technology and we're going to do these type of invasions that I believe are Fourth Amendment violations to start with, that's why I wanted the oversight, was be able to say, no, we're going to make sure we're on the straight and narrow here, and that we're not veering from what needs to be done. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that. And I was a little frustrated in the meeting. I think some committee members were kind of like, oh, that's interesting. What are we going to do now? I mean, what do we even meet for then?
Right, yeah.
For them to, because really, and this is a part that I don't want to go too far in my thought here, but the police department was already in the first oversight meeting saying, the rules that you gave us around who can do the searches won't work, and we need to expand it. Okay, because I brought a motion that said, it's going to be captain or above. Right. The lieutenant of the investigations also has access, and it needs to be approved by the chief or deputy chief.
Yep.
And for me, those are safeguards to make sure we're making good decisions and leadership has visibility before something bad happens rather than after, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for. But in this first meeting, they're already telling us that you need to expand this. And one of the recommendations the committee should make back to the council is that we expand it. So anybody in investigations can do it. They don't need an approval. And I'm going.
Did they give a reason?
Well, yeah, because it's going to be too hard. When they need something, having to get a hold of the chief and getting him to sign off on it just isn't feasible. And again, for me, I'm not worried about feasible. Right. I'm worried about, are we using the technology responsibly and in a way that makes sense to protect our privacy?
Yeah, for sure.
And the thing that's disappointing to me is we may never know.
Right.
And that's the part that's not acceptable to me. We may never know. And one of the reasons why this is so important to me is that we've already been through a set of turmoil with our police department.
Yes.
Okay. And I believe we are on the good side of that now coming out the other end. And a lot of credit goes to the chief and to Dale Plessis for making that happen. They are headed in the right direction. We've got new officers coming on. We're doing all the right stuff. I want to make sure we head off anything that could hurt that department before it would ever happen. That's why I'm working so hard on this now before we ever do a search.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that we do it right out of the gate. And so I think, to me, we need to, before we've even done a search, they're asking us to loosen the rules. And I think we need for sure to at least let it get up and running and see where we're at. And then we can adjust from there. And again, I've not wavered. I will not waver on the fact that I believe this is unconstitutional and we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. The council has made a decision though. And so now we do the best we can with the policy that we've got to make sure that it's adhered to. And that's really the option that we have today.
Yeah. Zach mentions, when it comes to our personal privacy and rights, extra work for those using this system is at least my concern. Protections have to be in place. I agree with that.
Absolutely.
There needs to be protections in place with the privacy. Yeah. And I know that you guys asked, and this is also, it's been interesting trying to get data from this whole situation because at council in the past, you guys have asked, like, how many cases do you think this would have helped you with? And it seems like there's no number that's really presented. So it feels like if we're going to do this, then we should have a trial run with extreme protections on it to get some data. Like, these are the 5 cases it helped with. These were the 10 cases, if that's the number, that we believe it would have helped us, but we had to wait 12 hours because chief and deputy chief can't imagine them waiting 12 hours, but just go with the example. We had to wait 12 hours in order to get approval, and so we weren't able to use the data from it. Like, okay, now we have hard data of what we're talking about, but right now we still have 5 more cases that we wouldn't have been able to do currently. So and that name
and maybe and that's the part that's interesting. So did it help us along a path that we would have gotten down anyway?
Exactly.
Maybe it sped it up. Maybe we solved the case a day earlier than we would have had we not had the search and we'd had to do it a different way.
Right.
Again, this is why I think it's important for everybody to understand that these are trade-offs, and we're at the very front end of the ultimate trade-offs that could come from this system. Because imagine for a minute we have this in place and it's going along and people just kind of get lulled to sleep and they don't really think about it anymore and everything's fine. And 8 years from now, I'm not on the council anymore. I'm not the one beating the drum that we need to worry about this. And we've got a new set of people there that don't even remember the issue or even ever thought of it. And now we've suddenly gone down this slippery slope of expanding its use. And now we're doing this. And now we've got them on light standards. And now it's hooked up to statewide databases. And now, it's searchable and our data is there for, 2 years rather than 10 days. And that creep, nobody even knew happened.
Yep.
And then you get all the way to the point, and I'm not suggesting we would ever get there in Minot. That's not my point here. But you get to the point where you have the story out of Fargo where the lady was detained for 108 days because AI facial recognition thought it was her in a bank fraud case when it just flat out wasn't her.
Right.
And she sat in jail for 108 days. And so technology can be good tools for certain things, but when we do this stuff, we're making trade-offs for who I believe we are fundamentally as Americans. And when we give that up, what do we have left at that point?
Right.
Now we got a police state where the law enforcement actually has a database of your movements at all times. Yeah. And that's what we're building now. And, there's plenty of people that say, well, your cell phone's way worse than that and all this. Understand, though, that there's a Supreme Court case called the Carpenter case around cell phone data that says that without a warrant, they don't have access to it. So law enforcement doesn't have your cell phone data. They don't know where you've been or your credit card data.
Yeah.
They need a warrant to go get it. And even with that, some of the companies are reluctant to even turn it over. They push really hard back because there is privacy issues, right? So just this idea that, this is settled court law and it's all fine and it's constitutional, we don't know that yet because it hasn't gone through the courts with the overall ubiquitous, state that we're headed for. And keep in mind, we are years behind other communities on this.
Right.
We're dealing with something now that's been in place for a decade other places.
Yeah.
And it's a little scary to me.
Yeah. It is scary. You had the flock system, which recently got a bunch of news and about the data that it was collecting, and you have cities removing it from their cities because of that. And you have Pokemon Go that was recently in the news, like this week or last week, and the headline of one of the articles was "You were never the player." They were collecting you were going to locations all around, doing whatever you do in Pokemon Go. I never played the game, but they had you driving around the town to get your little whatever prize it was that you got. And they were collecting all this data and building their AI system from the data that they were collecting from where you drove and the things that you did and the pictures that you took and stuff like that. It's amazing how much tracking that we're having. And as it becomes more apparent, people are getting more and more frustrated. So it definitely seems that.
And I think that all matters, but at the same time, like you did, Pokemon Go is a choice. You chose not to play it. I never played it. My kids played it for a little bit.
Right. I agree.
Those are choices that we make. And there's a big difference between buying a product or putting a Ring camera up. I mean, you watch the Super Bowl commercial with Ring about, create a neighborhood network of all of our cameras. Like, whoa, we're going down a pretty weird path here. But still, those are all choices, right? Law enforcement's a different question.
Yeah.
Law enforcement building a database of our movements. Again, I always go back to the old adage of the chilling effect. The chilling effect that this stuff has is if somebody believes, they're a certain political party or a certain organization is important to them and they want to go to that, but maybe they're important around town and they don't want people to necessarily know that that's something that they're involved in. Well, this would track where they're going all the time. So the chilling effect is now they don't do the things that they're interested in or something that they believe can change things for them. And that's not good. The idea that law enforcement would have this database, and that's why, again, I want everybody to understand, I've got no beef with what the police department has done and what they're asking for, because they have good intentions here. They want to solve crime. They want to do things that are good for the community. I just think that we need, as decision makers, we have to think, in addition to that, what the other ramifications are. Because I don't take an oath to uphold the police department policies. I take an oath to uphold the Constitution.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is a pretty straightforward question of whether these are illegal Fourth Amendment searches. I believe that they are. And I think long term, if you look at this in 20 years, the courts will eventually agree. Gotcha. Because the court cases that have been there talk about things like a small town that has one officer with one camera and it records the things that are there and it brings some data in. What the court cases talk about is when that becomes widespread and essentially a dragnet that you cannot move about without being tracked, that's where we trip over the edge.
I see.
That's where we got to with credit card data, with cell phone data, and I believe we'll get there with ALPR as well.
Makes sense. As mentioned by Terry, this same technology is currently being used by repossession companies, our city and state, on a regular basis. I think the solution to this whole thing is just pull the Steve Jobs move. Rumor has it, legend has it, that he would get an Audi, he'd rent it or lease it for 6 months because that was in his area where the rules were that he could have a temporary license plate on it. So then he'd just get another one, never had a license plate, so you could never track Steve Jobs in his car. Might be the solution. Crazy stuff, though. Some of the things, I think that this is important to say. I agree with what we've talked about, but some of the things that were noted is plus is stress. If a license plate is not on a hot list, no alert is circulated to officers. I want to go through this simply because it feels like there's a lot of misnomers about the information that this does, too.
Right.
The biggest discussion that we're having is the privacy portion of it. On the other hand, whether your license or whether your tags are expired, this doesn't appear to be looking for that. Only crimes tracked on the hot list are felony level crimes such as homicide, kidnapping, stalking, narcotics, or certain serious crimes or incidents such as a missing person or civil alert. You have the retaining of data, which is a huge discussion point. Won't be collecting names of individuals and can only be shared with other agencies on a case-by-case basis. That is a little bit of an interesting territory as well. And then you have what we talked about, the access by authorized users, but that net might be expanding if things go a certain direction. So
right. So the one thing to be careful about, though, is even though they're saying, yes, it's only these types of alerts that are going to come, think of that. If an officer's driving, they're driving up Broadway, someone's coming the other way. If it looks at that license plate, hits the database, pulls back information, goes, oh, they're wanted on a felony warrant, right? Boom, they get a big red alert. Okay, I know I can pick up which car it is. I've got to visually make sure that I've got it right because it could be wrong, and you got to be careful with that. That's only one side that's the live side of the system, though.
Right.
The idea that we would say, oh, it's not taking. It's not looking for tags to give that alert to say, pull this person over because their tag's expired. That's true. But it is still putting that in the database.
Okay.
It's still recording that information. It's still setting it aside. It's all there. And so, that's the question is, but the other part of it is if there, as I said, in 8 years, if there's a different council and I'm no longer there to push so hard on this stuff, and suddenly they come back and they say, hey, you know what? We really need some revenue for the city. If we started doing red light stops or these types of things, or we looked for tags, we could bring in an extra, $300,000 a year in these things. And you got a council that decides, that's a good idea. Let's do that. That's where we're at.
Right.
So I think all of everybody has their spot where they would get really uncomfortable with this. There are some that would love it that, hey, if we can protect one child from being abducted, if we can protect one silver alert, it's all worth it, right? Everything we're giving up. There's going to be some that are there. There's going to be some that are like, I don't feel great about this. And there's a line somewhere. And I guess I would ask everybody, figure out where your line is. Right. Because you got to watch this in the coming years because it's not going to get more restrictive. It's only going to get more loose.
Yep.
So we got to watch it.
Makes sense. Very interesting discussion. You mentioned revenue, so we can move on to the next topic. There was some budget stuff that was talked about at a special city council meeting. Sounds like revenue might be a key topic of discussion if we're not careful here in the next few years. It honestly, and I know that numbers and spreadsheets are all to the eye of the presenter because they're able to show things. But it feels like we're getting close to a deal where, hey, in the next 3 or 4 years, we might be in a dire situation if we're not careful. There was some graphs that were shown of how there was a required reserve that we're required to have as a city that's right now it's right around the high side would be $6 million. It's just under $6 million. And then by the end of this decade, we'll be below that if we continue on the path that we're on with no adjustments. And so then there was some proposed adjustments that could be made. Basically, what we're finding, though, is we need to be careful there. And then also, current spending is unable to be maintained without using reserves. So I think one thing that was brought up by city managers, he said that it's going to be difficult to maintain the $20 million property tax threshold that's kind of been set, and it's kind of his goal. Obviously, we're able to still in a look back period where we could go back to 2024, use that as a base year, and go all the way up to 29 million and make all the citizens of Minot so happy with a nearly $10 million increase in total property taxes. As you begin to look at this, what are your thoughts as you begin to prepare for this budget cycle, seeing where we're at, seeing the amount of reserves that we have been using, but that we semi-committed to. We don't have to do it, but semi-committed to for like the police department, things like that we're doing. What's your feel of the budget where we stand right now?
Well, so we've been painted this picture twice now that the lines, don't work long term, and I think everybody understands that. Now, one thing that's really important for people to understand about the discussion yesterday was when the finance director Dave Lakefield was talking about it. His graphs showed us going and taking every last dollar from property tax that we're allowed to under law. And that gap still exists.
Gotcha.
It might kick the can down the road a year or two where we hit that threshold if we don't change anything. And so the point is that we will not solve this problem with revenue.
Yeah.
That's it. There,
Gotcha.
full stop. There's no answer to that. You know, the only way that we could get there is, and that gets into some of the other stuff that they're trying to point out, that, Minot doesn't use special assessments.
Right.
We don't use the other tools that other cities choose to use to try to do this. And I would say that that's a good thing. You know, I think those that have followed anything in a place like West Fargo, you know, West Fargo is not happy. You know, you watch their city council race. The entire discussion is on specials. That's the whole process down there. Ours was
Their
property
specials is
tax
higher than their property taxes.
Exactly, and that's the method that they use. And you know, there's some argument to say that that's the right way, because what you do with a special is you say the area that's actually getting the benefit of whether it's a lighting district or curb and gutter or whatever it is, it's actually the people that live in that area that are paying the bill. And so really with a special, what the city does is it acts as the bank. So I live on a cul-de-sac. One method that we could use is we could say, our street needs to be, you know, resurfaced.
Yep.
Everybody's got to write a check for X. Like it's the HOA concept, right? Like we go door to door and we all get commitments and we're all going to do this and we're all going to chip in $10,000 and we're going to get our street repaved. Well, what the city does with the special is they act as the bank for that, and they say, okay, well, we'll work that out for you. We'll add it onto your bill and you'll pay it that way. That's just how we do it. But the city will front the money, right? So there's an argument to be made that that's the right way to go. The reason that I really don't like specials is I think it's a hidden way to hurt especially young new homeowners when they don't quite understand all the dynamics that are going to go on in their budgets, and they can get really hit by that. And so in a place like West Fargo, just about the time that they're finishing up their first build special that they got when the development was built, it's done. It took them 25 years to pay it off. Now we got to come through and do all the work again, and now you're going to get another one. And so it's perpetual forever. Right. So I'm not a fan of that. And so it's important to understand we will not solve the graphs that Dave Lakefield is showing us with revenue. We can't. There's no way to do it.
Yeah.
So the only way to get there is a combination of making good choices on revenue and getting our spending in order.
Yeah.
You know, right now, and sometimes it's just numbers, right? We have a property tax right now that's around $20 million that's coming in every year. We have a general fund budget that property tax is one of the main factors in that. That's at $71 million.
Right.
So even if you have 3% growth on both of those numbers, your general fund spending is going to grow faster than the property tax input, even if they're both locked at 3%, right? It's just the number scale. Right. And so that's a scary world. So the only way to solve that is you have to bend the curve of the general fund spending back down.
Yeah.
That's it. And you know, nobody on the city side wants to hear that. They're talking about doing 3% budgets again this year, minus 3%. Yep. They want to do it that way. That's all fine. But what we're going to see is they're going to come to the table again and say, well, I've stripped out everything I can. We've stripped out all of our training. We've stripped out all of our travel. We've stripped out all of our office supplies. We're going to try to go paperless because they're trying to nickel and dime, you know, $30,000 at a shot here, rather than actually dealing with the elephant in the room, which is that the size of our government has simply grown too big. Right. You know, I always go back to a number that the HR director gave me, and we didn't see it yesterday because we didn't go back that far. But in 2013, we had 320 city employees. Gotcha. Today, we have almost 500. Wow. And our population has actually shrunk slightly since then. Right. So we are off, and I'm not saying that we're going to ever get back to 320. That's not my point. But I would like to see us target getting back into the lower 400s. Yeah. You know, maybe that's the right size. We were a little behind at that point. The other thing I want to be clear about, and it didn't come out exactly this way yesterday, is that nobody is saying go find the 25 people that you're going to fire. Right. That's not the point whatsoever. It's taking a long-term approach that says as positions come open, we evaluate them and decide whether it's the right thing to fill them as is or make adjustments or do things a different way. We can do this the right way, which is what I've done my entire career. Everywhere that I've worked, when you run into this situation, when I worked at Delta, we went through bankruptcies. We went through major things where not only was it, we might slow your raises down a little. It was, no, actually, we're going to lower your pay for a while we go through the bankruptcy process because that's part of satisfying the court, right? So the management team is taking a lower wage. Yeah. So we're not talking about any of those things. We're simply talking about let's make good decisions and let's start bending the curve back down the other way. And yeah, I mean, if you want to show that as some of the numbers that we've got, It's if you look at this from 2015 till now, it shows that the total heads at the city actually down slightly. But one of the important things here to look at is what we did with that is we flipped part-time people to full-time.
Right.
And now, which is what's driving our costs. So we've got an incredible number of new full-time employees that are on the books, and we're spending the money there. So one of the things we asked for was, what are the actual FTE counts? And the HR director will come back to us with that. Alderman Fuller was talking about, what are the actual costs between salaries and benefits and all this stuff. So we are on an unsustainable trajectory, and we have to fix that.
Right.
That's the only answer to getting us back to a solvent spot. It's not, the terrible guys came in and lowered property taxes and made the city not be able to run, because that's not the part of the equation that's broken.
Right.
It's the spending side that's broken.
Right. So when we look at this, because we see that net change, top line, you have full-time employees, net change is basically plus 55, part-time net change is negative 64, and then you get your total change in employees. But a key year to look at is 2018 to 2019, where there's a substantial drop of around 45 employees. And this is when, my understanding is this is when Minot Parks actually gets pulled out of the city budget. So what we're seeing is there's a net change where we've dropped 9, but we lost basically an entire department too in that time.
Yeah, exactly. And when those roughly 50 employees got moved out of there, and a lot of that is a part-time, because that's, it's umpires and things like that on the park side.
Makes sense.
So all of that happens, but what's happened now is we just filled all that right back up.
Yeah, that's insane.
And I think you might even have that graph if you've got that one, because that's, this just tells exactly that story. What we did is we were at a steady state coming out of the back end of the oil boom with how staff looked. We make the fundamental change with the parks, but then boom, we exploded back up. Yeah. And now we're bigger than ever. And there are things that come with that. There's, we had to add the NOS biota plant as part of the agreement with making the boundary waters treaties and all the things work out. We had to put a bunch of employees down in the MAX facility now that are technically city employees. There's a federal reimbursement that passes through to take care of some of that stuff, but the overall bulk and size of the city had to increase for that, because when you add, 15 employees down there, that's extra burden on our HR team. So, okay, do we need another HR specialist in that team?
Yep.
There's all these different pieces that get added on to the overall cost of general government. And that's really what a lot of this comes back to, is at the end of the day, our enterprise funds, and it's not that we don't need to make good decisions there. When we talk about the meeting last night, we'll talk about a decision there. Our enterprise funds like water and sewer and trash, where you get a bill for the service and you're actually paying for it, and that all kind of self-contained, like a business-like entity, enterprise, I should say. We have to be very careful on those as well, but it's the general fund ones that can get bloated very easily and not and have a big detriment to property tax rates and everything else that goes with that. And so I think the point for people to understand is there is not a revenue solution to this.
Right.
It's not just, go find a place to tax. And here's the other parallel that I'll draw for you. So if you've been following what's going on at the state is saying, oh boy, oil revenue is going to be rough, although, you start a new war and maybe we got a new way to get some, right? So now gas is up $1.10 or whatever it is over the last few days. But the dire information coming out of the state is, what are we going to do next biennium? We're going to get killed.
Yep.
And if you notice, there isn't anybody, even the Democrats in the state aren't saying, oh boy, we better raise income tax, or boy, we better raise the sales tax.
Yeah.
There's nobody beating the drum of raising revenue, right? It's all, what are we going to trim to make sure we can still have a balanced budget? They get it. They understand the dynamics of working with the public and what's palatable.
Right.
Within city government, we've always had this crutch of saying, calculate what you need, and then the last number you end up with is what you charge the people.
Yeah, right.
And I've advocated all along for saying, no, let's figure out what we're willing to charge them and then make our budget fit that.
Yeah.
And that's where, I'm hopeful that we're going to stick very close to the just over 20 million that we had last year in property tax. I'm willing to see us go up the true growth, meaning new properties that came on the books, so that it doesn't affect anybody's current bill.
Yep.
I think that makes sense. We might, instead of 20.1, we might be at 20.4.
Yep.
That makes sense to me. But clawing back because we're scared of some boogeyman in the future and what this needs, that's going to be the opposite of what we need to do rather than trying to deal with the real problem today. And just being honest about it, part of my strategy over the last 2 years of going this hard on using reserves and trying to get that down is that the decisions get much more difficult when we don't have 40 million in the bank.
Yep.
If you've got 18 million in the bank and you look at it and you go, oh, do we really want to buy that land next to Public Works? It's $1 million to buy it. Yep. When you got 40 in the bank, it's like, that's what reserves are for. Just do it.
Let's go. Yep.
We need to make those decisions more difficult. And so that's been part of this strategy. Is to try to get us right sized so that we have to actually start making the tough decisions rather than making them too easy all the time.
So I think, in my opinion, one of the alarming things that was mentioned, and it may not feel alarming at the time, but in my opinion, one of the alarming things that was mentioned was that there was no direct reason for the increase in employees. It was just one here, one there, one whatever. So because you would hope that if you increased really 50 employees over the last 6 years, so we lost the Minot Parks, but we gained this. And the closest they could get, or the closest we could see, was the Nas Biota, which is under 10 employees. So it feels like it's just attrition, if you would, positive attrition, where you're just growing, and suddenly we're at this size. So that's kind of
well, and it brings up a really good point. So yesterday I was in a meeting where we were having discussion, talking about a part of our garbage collection process and how that works. And one of the solutions that we discussed was, hey, if we bought this piece of equipment and we added one head to their group, we could really provide a great service to the public, right? And it's a trade-off. And so I was just kind of offline chatting with Paul, because he sits next to me on the council last night as we're going through things, and I said, I can see why this stuff happens, right? Because you can make one good decision in one spot that says, I want to provide this to the public, and it costs us this, and one staff member does it. Well, 25 of those, and suddenly you've got 25 more employees, right?
Yep.
Every one of them, in and of themselves, a good decision, or at least a positive decision for the public, but they add up, and so that's what we have to be really careful about. Now, that all can still work as long as you have leadership on the other side saying, okay, as that's happening, we also had some gains over here. We bought technology, or we bought a piece of equipment. We have 2 people gone in this department right now, but we got a great new piece of equipment that actually solves that problem for us. We don't have to refill it. But if we're not ever doing that, if we're just mindlessly, we lost one, we better add one. If we do that over and over and over, the 25 we added because they're a great win for the public doesn't get offset by the savings the public should have seen by doing it well. And I'm not saying that all of our leaders aren't doing a good job in their way of doing things. But we have to have that mentality, and it's got to be a focused mentality to make it work.
No, what you're talking about is not how they're doing it, but more about the mindset of the government and how all that stuff works.
Right.
So that makes sense there. When you talk about going down to 400 employees, you mentioned we're not looking to do a mass 75-person or whatever be layoff. You're just saying over the next, I'll just throw out a year, next 4 years, there would be through attrition, that we would go and lose 75 employees to the size of our government, and we'd go on, and those employees probably would have already found other new jobs, or maybe they just decided to retire, or however that would have happened.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole point, is that we just by evaluating what we're doing, we figure out ways to do it differently or do it better. Now, make no mistake, some of that would have to come from making compromises about how we provide the service to the public. There may be things that need to change that. As just an easy example, because we have the library budget within our world and we have to oversee that, it might be one of those things where we say, you know what, because of the way funding works and the way that we've got to do this, we might have to look at how the hours work. Because right now, by the way that we're running our hours there, we have to have a set of part-time employees that help fill the edges of the day.
I see.
We're simply going down to, let's say, 8 to 5. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that, and I'm sure I'll get blasted because I get blasted by the library stuff all the time. My point is that's an easy illustration of how we may need to think about things a different way to solve issues, right? Now, one of the things that we saw last night was by simply staffing the police department up to whatever report would tell us is the right level of staffing, it's kind of a fuzzy thing to deal with. By doing that, we're bringing on an immense burden dollars wise. I mean, we're already talking about a $1 million deficit in that budget this year that we're going to have to deal with simply because we staffed it. Now, part of that is because I pushed so hard to make sure we weren't budgeting for people we didn't even have, right? I think we've been on and talked about that before. So now that we actually have them, we're going to have to pay for them. That's the way that works. And I think what we'll want to figure out is what are the measurable effects that we feel around town as we get staffed correctly, as we get them equipped correctly. What does that mean? Does it make us a better community? I hope that it does.
Right.
Because I think that's the bet that we're making. One other thing I was going to mention too. You mentioned, we know Nas Biota added that. One other one that's an easy one to understand the addition is we added a fire. That's right. Location. So when we add a station, we got an extra 9 people there or something like there just off the top. And then if you remember, there was also a path that we were on to add another 3 per station over the next couple of years. I think we've blunted that a little bit because the way the upfront funding worked kind of went away, but there's going to be that push continued to add 3 more people to each fire station. And again, we all want them to be safe. Don't get me wrong. We all do that. And I remember the discussion there where I remember my colleagues being adamant that this is a priority. Making sure fire is staffed at that level is a priority for this city. And so for me, then my comment back was, I understand that if the majority of the council decides that is a priority for us. My priority is that that's a zero-sum game. So if that's going to cost us on average $1.8 million going forward, then we need to find that somewhere else. So where's it coming out of? And I'll wait for them to tell me. Because remember, priorities are about what raises to the top, not what raises the cap higher. Right. Which I think that's how it's been looked at in certain ways.
Well, Minot is, and I've never found the right words to describe it, but as you go through other towns and other cities, not in North Dakota, but you get outside of North Dakota, we have such a nice town in Minot. Like, there's just no other way to say it. We have nice fire stations. We have nice public bathrooms. We have nice, like, whatever you want to look at it. It is above a lot of the other places that you go and visit. And that means that there's a lot of money that's being spent, which means there's some things that we have that I think we feel as a need, but in some ways it probably is a luxury. Whether or not we want to admit that or not is another game.
Well, and the other thing that everybody always has to understand, and we saw some of the graphs yesterday comparing us to other cities in the state and all the stuff that goes with that. The thing that everybody needs to understand with that, outside of Fargo, because Fargo has some of the same challenges we do, there's nobody building a $1.5 billion flood protection system. Okay, those bonds will be here most of my grandson and granddaughter's lives. Okay, right now 2080 is about our target for how long the bonds are going to be here. Right. So that means we've got sales tax tied up for that long. We are hampered on the revenue side because we've got these unbelievably big projects. And even when the final NAS sunset comes, hopefully in the next couple of years here, and it's a great new day, diverted all the flood because we're not covering the flood obligations right now. That's the issue we've got. When you're giving up most of a full penny of sales tax just to fund those items, we're in a tough spot. And so I'm with you. I think whether it's our snow removal teams, it's our road maintenance teams, we do a heck of a job because people got to remember too, we're in an extreme environment.
We are.
Again, we were almost 70 again last week. I think today it's below 0 again this morning and snowing again. Those ups 40s. And ups and downs that wrecks roads, it wrecks infrastructure. It's not great. And our teams do a great job of doing that. And it's that stuff that we need to be great at, and we are. And I do want to fund, right? That government has to fund those things between infrastructure, roads, public safety. That's the sweet spot of what government does. And we have to do it and do it well.
I was thinking to myself, I think about this too often. I'm like, man, I have too much clothes. And then as my consolation, I say, you know what? I do, but I live in a weird place where you literally have to have 2 closets, one for summer and one for winter. Like the clothes there's some of them that cross over, but not many of the clothes cross over. It's definitely an extreme environment, like you said. That was fairly decent recap, thorough recap of the special budget meeting. Then you guys had another 2-hour meeting after that hour one. Thankfully, you guys had a 30-minute break there, where you guys jumped into. Since we're on budget, we'll just talk about the budget moves that went on there first, and then we'll jump into the liquor license stuff. I highlighted 3 of them. One was at the airport. You guys had a contract with H.A. Thompson versus Mowbray Sons. There was discussion. Basically, it sounds like city's trying to get to a place where we're on a 3-year contract schedule. Do you see this being better for budgets and for even negotiate? There's even talk about maybe instead of having departments get contracts, maybe the city get department contracts. So if we need to go and have an inspection of the HVAC system in one place, maybe we could do that for 5 places and save money and stuff like that. Sounds like there might be maybe not millions, but in the attrition of everything might be, or culmination of everything might be a substantial amount of savings there eventually.
Yeah, and that one was interesting. There was those discussions that kind of weave their way through there, and that's where it's good to hear from the city manager on what his perspective and how he intends to do things, and that's always important. But really the core of that question was, we had a request for bids, essentially. It wasn't a formal process, which is always kind of a weird thing when it's down at a lower dollar amount, where we went out and said, hey, we need inspection services. How much will it cost if we do it? We got answers back from 2 of them. That was based on a 1-year contract. But then the city, just through some miscommunication a little bit, and nothing nefarious whatsoever, but when they actually went to go do the contract with H.A. Thompson, they essentially said, well, what would that look like for a 3-year contract? And again, this I give Scott Samuelson a lot of credit on this, because when he saw that, he said, well, wait a second, that's not how this was approached. And if a 3-year option was an option, that may have changed something for another provider. And so his motion was just that we put it out again and clarify that and get it right. And I think that's super important. Things that we do from a contract basis and the way that we go about selecting vendors and spending the people's money when we're working with local vendors, we have to be as above board and as perfect as we can be in those negotiations. And so I think it was the right thing. I think, it's gonna delay us just a little bit, but we'll get it back out there, hopefully get a contract in place and get it rolling. Gotcha. But yeah, it does open up those other things then down the road. That's where I think the city manager is bringing kind of that operational focus that from his past about how you do these things, and let's get the contracts right and do those things. And I think we're gonna see fruits of that over time with him.
It's good. Another budget item that was brought up was a police car. Obviously, this is for a K-9 unit specifically, so it needs special considerations for it. That was approved. But it brought up the bigger question that there's a chance it may not be approved because of budget problems, or budget tightness, but there's a chance that there's several police cars that we're going to need with the hiring of these new police, the additional police force, which was kind of interesting because I guess I didn't expect that. Kind of expected that we probably already had the tools for the police force. We just didn't have the police force to fill the tools. What was your kind of perspective on that?
And that's actually why I was asking the question. That was also my sense.
Yeah.
Was that it's likely we already have that there, which brings a different question into the mix, which is, did we for a few years have more equipment than needed? Because if you remember at the end of last year, we also added 5 additional police cars because the chief was asking us to equip some of the SWAT members so that they could respond directly from home if that was needed. And again, I have things that I want to continue to work through and oversee related to how SWAT works and all that stuff. At the end of the day, I want to give the chief the tools he needs. This gets back to ALPR, right? Even though I don't agree with that tool, it doesn't mean that I'm not an advocate for the police department. And I don't want to give the chief the things that he needs to do his job and for his team to do their job and be safe doing it. So, and the one last night was an interesting one, and it gave me a chance to verify with the city manager that does this fit his vision? Because one of the things he and I have talked about is that if it's on the agenda and the recommendation is to approve something, that he agrees with that and is behind that decision that's being made. And I asked him that last night because knowing what we know going forward and the budget pressures that we're under, is this a priority? Right? I mean, there's lots of vehicles that are maybe past effective life and we could do differently at the city. Does this one reach that level to do a budget amendment to get it done and to do all this work? Excuse me. And his answer was yes. He said that this is one that makes sense. Let's go get it done. And good enough for me. I want to give the city manager the benefit of the doubt on those things until there's a reason not to. And I think right now he's doing a nice job with that and leading the city and giving us those options that make sense. Because he understands at the end of the day that if we get to June, July, August, and we've got a budget that's broken and busted, that's his role. That's on him.
Right.
And we're going to be asking those questions. So he knows what's coming, and he should be giving us those answers on whether we should do something based on what he can see overall. And I think he's doing that.
Yeah, that's good insight there. one more budget item that I noted was sewer and water building. This was something that you put a motion forth to shelve it. I believe it was in the consent or action in consent
It was in
items.
consent, yeah.
It was in the consent items, and it passed 6-1. Moved it to a CIP. Moved it to the CIP. But basically, this was a building that had been approved to be completely rebuilt.
Yeah, it was so out at the Public Works complex out there on the west side of the entrance road that comes down from Burdick. There's a water and sewer building there. There's a building that is our main pumping facility, I believe, is what's in there for wastewater. And then right next to it, there's a water and sewer building, is what it's called. And inside, there's some office space. There's a kind of a break room space. There's some storage for meters and things like that. And it's an older building. It's like many around town, it needs some updates. It needs some things done to it. And in a world where we didn't have $1.5 billion on flood and amazing NOS costs and other priorities that we're dealing with, it might make sense to rebuild that building and do it. The building that they had designed, and this is the part that gets me a little bit, but we did have some engineering work done and some architecture work done. The building they designed, we thought would be $2.5 million. And during the budget process last year, I raised some concern about that. I wasn't sure that it was the right decision. We went ahead with leaving it in and assumed that it would be built this year. Well, when we put the bids out, what would have been the winning bid was at $2.7 million, which is already over the budget. And they found that bid was not responsive because it didn't have a piece of the puzzle that needed to be in there for contingency, which would have added another $350,000. So we're over $3 million, even with the best bid. The best responsive bid was at $3.5 million.
I see.
So we're a full $1 million over what we thought and what we budgeted.
Right.
And the way that I would put it is, in a world of priorities across this entire city right now, if I said I've got $3.5 million to do something, would I choose that for the people? No, I wouldn't. And I, from the beginning, I wouldn't have. We had a lot of other priorities. We were trying to work our way through the budget. And to be honest with you, when you're looking at a 200-page document and $220 million that we're trying to deal with, sometimes we don't solve all those each year, right? We have to rely on staff. We have to rely on our city manager to get as many of those right as we can. This is one. So my motion, you got it right. We shelved the project and essentially said, put it back in the CIP so it can be reprioritized to figure out where it falls in our overall hierarchy of what we're trying to accomplish. Because what people need to understand is that when we're doing this stuff, and there's funding source things and there's stuff that goes into this, but in a general sense, we have to look at it and say, okay, well, we've got 3rd Street, right? We got the 3rd Street Bridge. We've got the 3rd Street reconstruction, which we talked about a couple of meetings ago. We've got, we just did 16th Street and the retention ponds on the west side by Nash Finch, right? We just had a discussion up here by your office of what, another retention pond project and how much are we going to spend on that one? Again, originally engineering's estimate at $700,000, now almost $3 million for that retention pond.
Wow.
In a world where plus, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars of lead pipe in the ground that we've got to deal with. In a world where we've got all of those priorities, again, if I said I've got $3.5 million to work on priorities, would it be to rebuild that building?
Right.
I don't think it is.
Yeah.
And that was the action we took, and I was glad to see that we did that last night.
And so just for viewers, CIP, that's the capital improvement plan, and that's kind of where just basically all the projects of the city are kind of analyzed and prioritized.
Which keep in mind, the current CIP as it sits today, and this is without a wastewater treatment plant that we had on there in prior years, I think we're still just under $1 billion in CIP projects. Okay, and the CIP is meant to be a 5-year CIP. So what we're saying is we've identified things that we probably need to do as a city in the next 5 years that totaled almost $1 billion.
It's an incredible amount.
We don't have it. No. I mean, and no amount of federal and state help even is going to get us there. Right. So it's all about taking those projects and lining them up and prioritizing them top to bottom. Because the alternative is we start saying, okay, well, we need a 3rd Street Bridge surcharge on water bills, and we're going to charge $9 a month to everybody to rebuild that bridge. Yeah. Right? I mean, those are the types of things that we'd have to go to if we're trying to do the full project. Yeah. But then you got a bridge one. Now you've got an 11th Avenue one by the Scandinavian Park, because we're going to be redoing that road over the next couple of years. Okay. It starts to get crazy. Expensive, yeah. And that's where priority comes in, right? No, it makes sense. Makes sense. Last
Well, I'll say last topic. I think it mainly is the liquor license that came up at the city council meeting. There was actually a little more progress. It seems like every time this comes up, there's like a couple things that are chipped away at this thing, and one day it'll be done. But for the special, so there's a supper club license, 150 people, service has to be going out, 60%. I think dinner receipts has to be at 60%. So you have that, and then basically people were wanting to have special event licenses, and right now they had ways that they were doing it. So, but you guys are having to go through this line by line because we have to add more grit to this ordinance. And so basically one of the proposals that was passed was that you could get a special event license. I believe this is for existing bar license holders, where you can go 21 days annually. You have an annual 21-day total that you can go off-site and use your special event license. That can be 1 day or 2 days a month for the whole year, minus 3 days, right?
Yeah.
But however you want to do it, it just accumulates to 21 days. And then there was another thing that was brought up that I thought was interesting was this committee that would kind of oversight, and I think that kind of got set aside because it wasn't necessarily supposed to be a part of ordinance, but that's something that could still come up down the line. How close do you think we are to getting the liquor license finally finalized, and is it coming out kind of how you hoped it would? Or I don't know if you hoped that you would be in the middle of detailing it.
Yeah, I think, so just on that first question, first, it's not where I would have chosen to have it go, because as I was trying to get at last night in the meeting, one of the reasons why we're getting down into this unbelievable granular rabbit hole here, right, where we're literally writing a bullet while we're live in a meeting saying, okay, well, let's limit it to 21 days. And,
right.
Like we said, the unintended consequences that comes from that kind of decision making are not great.
Yeah.
Right? It's just how it is. So,
right.
Sorry, my
You're good.
I'm crazy
Yeah.
today. But the unintended consequences that come from that kind of decision making are not good. And so what I would have preferred to solve most of this issue is that we no longer have a cap that keeps our license, whatever phantom number it might be, 125,000, whatever it is, we'll see, because we're going to have an auction for one here relatively soon, what they're actually worth. If we had gone away from that, the special event thing doesn't matter, because now you can be, if you're a bar owner, you can simply get a second license for the second premise you want to run, and it doesn't cost you much.
Right. Yep.
I say much. A couple $1,000s is still expensive. My thought all along had been, if we could get the caps out of the way and get past that, I would love to see our liquor licenses down at $250. Like, to me, they're a hindrance to getting businesses going and concepts that people want to try. I mean, my son-in-law is a Steelers fan, right? We don't have a Steelers bar in Minot. We, somebody could open on Sundays during football season because they want to watch the Steelers game for 3 hours and serve a few drinks to their friends, right? Yeah. And you could get a license to do that. Like, you could get there. Now, I get it. The council made this decision. That's how a lot of this stuff works, right? I might have my opinions, but I'm not the majority of the council. Yep. So the majority of the council decided that leaving the caps in place makes sense, and it needs to be heavily regulated. It's federally regulated. I mean, we had people at the podium telling us how detrimental alcohol can be to society, and it needs to be regulated, and we need to stay on top of it. And as I said, believe me, I know that better than anybody. Yep. Okay? Personal family experience. Right. Yep. I am not a fan of alcohol. I don't drink. I don't touch it because of what I saw as a kid. Right. So I understand it. And I don't want people to think that I'm just, glossing over that, because I, better than most, I think, understand it. But the issue is that now, because we've gone that direction, we've said, nope, it's got to be heavily regulated. Now we got to write every line of the code. Yeah. Right. So now we've got somebody who wants to run 2 premises, because under special events permits today, they can sort of do that. So they can have a whole other spot where they run, they open for 6 weeks in the winter or whatever that is. And that's not the intent of the ordinance. Right. The intent of the ordinance is you have a contained premise that the police department can certify, essentially, and that is your premises. And you can serve there, and that's how your license works. And then you have the ability to do a few events and do things off-site. So, I brought a motion that said 21 days. It could just as easily have been 30 days. Whatever we decided on, they went with the 21 that I said. And, when we got some feedback later in the meeting that could have a detriment to a specific business. Right. And yes, I understand that. Nothing we ever do is perfect. And are we ever perfectly informed on any bad consequences that can come from the actions that we take? Of course not. I mean, we always have that possibility. At the same time, we have to do the best that we can with the hand that we're dealt. And the hand we're dealt is we have to regulate all of this stuff now, because I am not willing to have one license open up 9 different locations around town to serve. That defeats the purpose of why we have licensing.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
While I think that, we'll continue to work to try to make some things happen so that we're not being a detriment to individual businesses. It's not the intent here.
Never.
At the same time, we do have to deal with the fact that we've got to regulate all this now because we didn't choose to make it simple. The example I always give is that, we run our accounting office. A guy showed up next door and put up a sign on the front of his building and said tax returns.
Gotcha.
Not only did he not need a city license, he didn't even have to tell him he was operating.
Right.
I got no say in protecting my thing. And now, again, we do a good job, and I know that we're fine with that. I don't have any issue with that. That's how every other business type works.
Yep.
They've made the case that this alcohol is so detrimental to society that it's got to be overseen this way. It's got to be limited. It's got to have all this stuff. Well, then we got to do the hard work to actually limit it and to do the stuff.
It's very so. Previously, basically, if you had a liquor license, then you were in, and you could, like you said, you could open up as many special event licenses that you wanted to. So you could have a bunch of pop-up stuff, maybe only lasting whatever, but you could have as many locations as you wanted because you're already in per se.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and one important caveat to that, and it was raised, and we did add that as an amendment. A premises where they've got, let's say, an enclosed bar, if they do a couple events a year that are out on their property, that those are not considered part of your 21 days because they're attached to your premises. So if you've got an outdoor area, that's not normally covered under your base license, so you do need a special event permit to cover that. It's not going to stop them from doing that unlimited. They can open every day all summer if that makes sense for their property. And that's not what we're going for here. We're talking about, 19 blocks away, I've got a whole other establishment. I got a different set of staff over there running that one. It's essentially a second bar. We're going to allow that up to a certain number of days.
Yeah, it seemed like basically if you wanted to, and maybe it was done a little bit, but you could have a business model where, hey, I have XYZ business, I have a liquor license, you can hire me, and I can go to your place and we can set up a bar basically, and that's how you could operate a business almost, and that's not the intention of what the liquor licenses were supposed to be. It's supposed to be at a location. So interesting stuff. Well, we've covered everything. Well, I guess not everything. There's still the pound that we could talk about, but it sounds like that'll come up at a future meeting as well, with the temp vet services for the pound, or vet services for the temp pound. And there's people that jumped into the city council race since the last time we were live. We have a new councilman candidate and a new mayor candidate. Of course, that field won't be set till April 6th when signatures are actually turned in. So there's more people that are planning on jumping in, it sounds like, but we'll know the full cast on April 6th. So I'm sure that's something that you get to watch closely because you get to find out. It's going to be a complete reset of council for you guys. It's going to be interesting.
Well, and I think if I remember right, when you guys were talking about before, if you think about that, turning over 6 or 7 members in 2 years, it's a big deal.
It is.
Now, there's an outside chance that, maybe a prior council member decides to jump back in the race and maybe gets elected that way. So there's some things that could happen there. But I think we're going to see a new course set for a new era in the city. And I feel that we are in a little bit different era. We're not in the era of, if we just throw enough spaghetti at the wall, we're going to make some things happen. We're having to make the more difficult decisions. And it's important to have people with that mentality there to make that work. Now, we can't lose sight of growth and making sure that we have a vibrant economy and all the things that are going on. But I think one of the most important things we can do is provide a stable regulatory environment and a stable tax environment so that businesses can flourish because they have certainty, right? One of the worst things that you can have is you can have somebody get a business plan put together and get something off the ground and going, and then suddenly a tax bill jumps by 20%, right? We can't do that to people. Especially when we've made good progress in going the other direction. So, I think it'll be good to see what happens this summer and who joins the council in the direction we end up going after that.
For sure. One comment, Ferris says, bless you, bless them. Great explanation on why we need to reduce the size of government. That's going back to some of the conversation that we had about that. So really appreciate you coming on today. It's been Great conversation.
Yep. Good to see you as always.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone that watched this episode of Minot Talk Care of the Dakotan. Be sure to like and subscribe. We'll be live this Thursday, 9 a.m. with more conversation. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.